It went on for more than 100 years. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children, starting as young as 4 years old, forcibly separated from their homes and their families, legally mandated to attend Canadian government residential schools. It was an attempt to deal with what was referred to as the Indian problem. The government assimilation policy was geared to integrate these children into the dominant Canadian culture. However, in most cases, the children were exposed to horrific treatment within the school systems. Without protection from their families, the children were often subjected to years of continual verbal and physical abuse. There is also extensive official recorded testimony detailing sexual abuse, high death rates due to severe neglect, and what many survivors describe as torture.
So I know today that it was a breeding ground for dysfunction, and there's been a lot of suffering as a result of what happened to people at residential school. You know, when you have whole generations of people that don't know how to be affectionate with one another or communicate with each other in a healthy way, you're going to have problems, and it's showing today. And you throw in violence and sexual abuse in that picture, and guaranteed there's going to be huge problems, social problems in our communities, and it's happening today.
If there are residential school survivors, and I know you're out there, please stand up so we can acknowledge you.
Why we are here together to say we are sorry. This is a crucial first step.
In an unprecedented event in Canadian history, Canada's top government officials, one by one, stood before the world and took responsibility for the damages created by an assimilation policy that the government now fully recognizes as wrong.
Today we recognize that this policy of assimilation was wrong, has caused great harm, and has no place in our country. We now recognize that far too often these institutions gave rise to abuse or neglect and were inadequately controlled, and we apologize for failing to protect you. Therefore, on behalf of the Government of Canada and all Canadians, I stand before you in this chamber so vital, so central to our existence as a country, to apologize to Aboriginal peoples for the role the Government of Canada played in the Indian residential schools system.
But others have made the case that the residential schools policies were not just wrong, but constitute nothing short of genocide.
When you forcibly move children from one group to another, like it says in the Genocide Convention, the children, that's genocide. So that's why I say, yes, it was genocide, because it was the law. They were forcing people. And when you force people and teach their children another language and different customs, that's genocide. You're killing a culture, a way of life. And that was the intent.
There was an acknowledgement that the policies behind the residential schools were designed to kill the Indian and the child. For the government, for the Prime Minister to say that, I think is a powerful admission of what they set out to do, that they were breaking up children from their families, they were breaking down families, that they were breaking down the language and they were breaking down cultures. It was nothing short of genocide.
Successive Canadian governments and various churches were complicit in the mental, physical, and sexual abuse of thousands of Aboriginal children through the residential school system.
We apologize to those.
The Canadian government apology to residential school survivors was received by First Nations audiences with mixed reactions. Yet one sentiment was common among the leadership and survivors. The apology is only the beginning of a long struggle toward healing and the correction of the wrongs committed by the Canadian government in the treatment of First Nations people.
We heard the Government of Canada take full responsibility for this dreadful chapter in our shared history. We heard the Prime Minister declared that this will never happen again. Finally, we heard Canada say it is sorry.
I think it is a bit of a closure for many survivors that there is an acknowledgement that there was a wrongdoing and that they had been abused, and that they can now move forward to start a process of healing as well for our families and our children, that we don't perpetuate the cycles of dysfunction within our families.
We were hoping that the Prime Minister would have added a commitment. We had suggested that the Government of Canada endorse the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and we had recommended that they declare a National Indigenous Languages Act as action items that would provide greater substance to the apology. They did neither.
The government apology on June 11, 2008 was preceded by the largest Indian legal claims settlement in Canadian history. The terms include payment to the 77,000 known survivors for what is called the common experience, and also an additional individual experience payment process for survivors who survived sexual exploitation and other abuses. A cornerstone to the agreement is the recently formed Indian Residential Schools Truth and Reconciliation Commission, whose mandate is to create an official record of the testimony of the survivors. While these are positive steps in reconciling Canada's role in the residential school systems, there is certain to be more, much more, information that will come to light for all the world to see. For Northwest Indian News, I'm Doreen Manuel reporting.
Even though the Indian boarding school policies and practices in the United States were clearly as problematic as those of the Canadian residential schools, the U.S. has issued no apology to date.